Let's turn to the life of Phoebe Palmer and consider this phrase, set the table on fire, which refers to her altar theology. And there she is. Mostly the first half of the 19th century, working in a revival context, really partnering with Charles Finney sometimes in camp meetings across North America into Canada, and in partnership with her husband, Dr. Palmer, and really setting a stall out for something new, but something very much in the line of Wesley's, the revival side of the Wesleyan tradition. If American Protestantism had a kitchen table where revival was plated and served hot, Phoebe Palmer would be there, apron dusted with urgency, insisting that listen, holiness is not a distant mountain, but tonight's supper. Everything is now. And so this is altar theology. That's the phrase to take into your mind. It's very, very simple, very simple. Place yourself wholly on the altar. Trust that God accepts what is offered and believe that the sacrifice is sanctified. The altar sanctifies the gift. So this changes everything almost immediately because entire sanctification is not the prize at the end of a marathon. It is the gift received in a decisive act of faith. And as one summary put it, Palmer concluded she just needed to trust God. It's like you're standing on the edge of a cliff. There is a time, or a swimming pool. That makes it a bit nicer. You're standing on the edge of the swimming pool, but there is a time when you step out, trusting that the water will hold you up. There's this time, there's a moment when you step out. And so I need to trust God. She just declared that full sanctification could be experienced immediately by giving one's all to Him. And that sentence, that concept still crackles, still has mileage. It represents a boldness that we are tempted sometimes to forget. Now, her genius was right here. It was pastoral nerve. She refused to let holiness drift into theological abstraction. And she hosted these Tuesday meetings for the promotion of holiness. She began as the host, probably like making tea in the back room. And then she was only 29 years old. She'd been married 9 years. And she made her way by the age of about 32, 33 to hosting these meetings, simply teaching that God wanted everything for you, and he waited on you to want everything from him. Believers could be sanctified right now through consecration, through faith, not after years of despair, not after achieving some kind of moral perfection, not climbing, clawing their way up a ladder of morality, but right now, by faith, by consecration, I lay my all upon the altar. It comes out in many 19th century hymns that way. She wrote a book, the first book, most successful one, but there was a series of books after this, but the first one was called The Way of Holiness. And that became a map for ordinary believers who were tired of oscillating between fervor and failure. And in partnership with revivalists like Charles Finney, she helped to catalyze what would become the broader holiness movement, mostly in North America, but she did visit the British Isles. And later streams that came out of it, like Keswick, would echo her insistence that victory and rest are the, quote, rightful heritage of believers, not entered by laborious effort, but by faith. If it is just by effort, it's very hard to disentangle it from being a works salvation, isn't it? It's just try harder. And the language that she used still resonates and still bears currency in the ongoing, probably for the next century and a half. She set a stamp upon it, shifting holiness from spiritually heroic striving to trusting surrender. And in a church culture that often quietly assumes that transformation is slow and rare and mainly just for the elite, the specialists, she said, no, the Spirit is generous. God does not hoard sanctity like a miser. The altar is already burning. Are you ready? And the altar sanctifies the gift. And for that audacity alone, she deserves recognition. She was the first one to have men and women in the same meeting. So there was a kind of special brilliance about Phoebe Palmer. And because at its best, altar theology protects two luminous truths. First, consecration is concrete. Holiness is not an internal mood, but an offering. You lay your ambitions, you lay your resentments, you lay your wounds, your body, your bank account, you lay your reputation on the altar. So if you ever spend time meditating on the first paragraph in Romans 12, you see that this is Romans 12 lived out loud. So that's the first point, consecration. What does consecration mean from a believer's perspective? And that was the beginning. And then second, assurance is possible. And this is pure Wesley. And but Palmer's move took Wesley's theology of assurance one step further, subtly but powerfully. She said, if the altar has received the sacrifice, if the sacrifice is placed on God's altar, this is God's altar, God's perpetually burning altar, the consuming fire of God's presence. And if what touches the altar is made holy, then the believer may trust that God has accepted the offering. So there's a shift. This is the point. There's a subtle shift from introspective self-analysis. Am I holy enough? Am I doing it right? To the character of God. Is God faithful? Is God loving? Is God present? Is God powerful? Is God here? And so, in an age that's paralyzed by self-doubt, that is liberating. It takes you away from the mirror of self-analysis onto the worship of the presence of God and the acknowledgement of the presence of God. And yet, any theology that emphasizes immediacy risks flattening the slow, uneven work of grace. Correct? And Palmer's decisive act of faith can sound in less careful hands like a spiritual switch. You just flip it and the struggle evaporates. Done, done. And the language of victory instead of constant defeat can, if it's untethered from realism, shame those who still wrestle with depression or addiction or doubt. You and me. And so you could be tempted into hypocrisy or into denial or into an unreality. So the danger is not in her core claim that God sanctifies, it's in the cultural afterlife of that very claim. And movements that descend from altar theology sometimes slide into a performative religion. If you're not radiant, you're not joyful enough. If you're not, you mustn't have believed hard enough. You're not healed because you don't have enough faith. If you still limp, perhaps you never climbed onto the altar properly. But sanctification in Scripture is both crisis and process. There are moments of surrender, but after that alter the trajectory of a life. And there are long nights of pruning that feel anything but triumphant. There is growth, there is development, there is two steps forward, one step back times, as well as crisis moments. So Palmer emphasized the crisis. We must supply the patience. Think too, while we're considering this, there was something quietly revolutionary about her leadership as a uh, early Victorian, to use that word, um, context, as a early Victorian female. For 40 years, she convened these holiness meetings in her home, shaping spirituality across many denominations in an era when women's formal authority was constrained. She didn't wait for permission to speak about sanctification. She testified to what God was doing in her. And in a church that often still debates about whether women can preach, Palmer simply did the work of theological formation. She interpreted scripture, she systematized experience, she mentored younger leaders. Altar theology was not only a doctrine, it was an embodied act of ecclesial courage. So, what is here for us, would you say? What do we do with her now? We can keep her confidence that holiness is not elitist. We can keep her insistence that faith is not passive but daring. We can keep her refusal to treat God as reluctant. But we also braid her decisiveness with a thicker account of suffering. And we remember that some sacrifices burn slowly and some altars smolder for decades. The Spirit sanctifies not only in these crisis moments of consecration, but also in therapy rooms or hospital corridors or ordinary Tuesdays when no one feels victorious. But Palmer's altar still stands, and the question is not whether we can climb onto it once and for all, but whether we can learn to live there, offering, receiving, trusting that even our unfinished selves are met by a God who does not despise the offering. Holiness, in her vision, begins with surrender. We just have to make sure it continues with mercy, corporate communal mercy, and then maybe something new will begin. God bless.